this is progress. If you have any questions about the iClicker or anything like that, what I would do is I would contact someone in the Learning Resource Center. This is something that so it's like I have everything set up on my end sort of thing. So if you bought a clicker from a friend and yours isn't registering or something like that, just make sure that you get it fixed. Okay, so just make sure that you get it fixed, and so the next time for our next class, you have your iClicker ready and all of that sort of thing. I'm really sorry about this, but so can we just look around for a second at everyone else in the class and all of that? Okay, so this is a really large class, right? And so it sort of has to, all of the rules have to sort of apply equally to everyone. And that's sort of unfortunate in the sense that I can't, so this is not a situation where if you're oh, Dr. Petrakis, I'm here, I just don't have my iClicker, or my iClicker isn't working, or something like that. I'm sorry. I can't give you points for attendance. But let me tell you this, that attendance is a very, very small percentage of your final grade. So the point that I'm trying to make is that even though I cannot give you attendance points, if you don't click in today, it is all going to come out in the wash, right? Just at the end of the semester, the 0.05% of your final grade is not going to make or break you getting an A or an A minus or a B or something like that. Just please, please, please make sure that you get the iClicker sort of shenanigans / business figured out by our next class. All right. Question? Yep. I would just press A. So far, let me see how many people I have already clicked in. Let's see. I have 207, 208, so it looks as though most people are successfully clicking in. So if you have your iClicker right now, just hit the A button. I will leave up the timer so you can click in the next couple of minutes. Okay. All right, fantastic.
Clicked it more than once.
Also, so there was something else I wanted to talk about. You guys, is there something due next week? Yeah. Okay. Then there's something due. Okay. So I was going to talk about the assignment at the beginning of class, but then it occurred to me what I'm going to do throughout the semester is talk to you about the assignment in class. The TAs are going to talk to you about the assignment in tutorial, and then it's a sort of situation where we spend 4 hours, 2 whole class periods over the course of the semester talking about the assignments. So I know that I've been institutionalized almost my entire life in university and all of this sort of thing. I sort of know where you guys are coming from with all of this, right? So a lot of you guys are first semester, first year students, and there's a lot of anxiety about, turning in your first assignment for this really big history class. I know that I've talked to students about this, there's this imposter syndrome here where it's oh, I don't know, I was admitted to the U of T, and then you think you can't do it, and all sorts of things like that, and that isn't the case, right? This isn't the case. If you follow the instructions on the assignment, right, in terms of how I want the paper to look, and in terms of what the question is actually asking you, it's going to be all right, okay? This first assignment is one where there's going to be 2 versions of this assignment. So the first assignment you're going to turn in is your paper. And so nothing's perfect the first time around, whether I write a paper or whatever. The first time you write a paper, there's always issues that you need to fix it. So you're going to turn in your first draft. The TAs are going to make comments on your papers. They're going to tell you what you need to do to improve. And then you're going to turn in a second version of this paper. I think it's sometime in October. So there's going to be 2 versions of this paper. The first one that you do, and we're going to sort of we're going to look at it, and we're going to be these are some aspects of your writing that you need to work on. You're going to be okay, awesome. And then you're going to fix it for the next version of this paper, right? So nothing's perfect the first time around, right? There will be mistakes made. We are a university to learn, and that is okay. I've taught long enough now to where I almost firmly believe that grades are one of the biggest hindrances to actual education, right? Because you guys get so freaked out about your grades and all of that sort of thing. And instead of actually learning how to write a paper, what this becomes about is trying to figure out the assignment, right? It's under like criteria for evaluation, right? What we're looking for is just simply evidence of thoughtfulness, right? A clear thesis statement. Evidence that's used throughout the paper to support that thesis, right? That's basically what we're looking for. And so for the first assignment, it's okay to get stuff wrong, right? It's totally all right to get stuff wrong because you're going to rewrite the paper in light of your TA's comments for your second draft, right? So this is really about learning, like learning how to write, how to use historical evidence, how to actually make an argument. That's what I hope to achieve with this assignment. It's not, like I said, it's not going to be perfect the first time around. I know that you guys don't have any, that you guys don't know anything about 17th century English political history, right? I understand that, right? And the purpose of the assignment is not for you guys to be brilliant. It's not for you guys to like write this award-winning paper. It's just simply how to learn to write in a first-year history class. So I just really want us to sort of like get over ourselves for this first assignment. Just take a deep breath, close your eyes, okay, and just do it. Because it's not going to be just okay, but it is going to be awesome. Okay, we are all going to get through this, and it's going to be just fine. If you have any questions, once you start writing your paper, right, you can email me, you can come to my office, you can chat my ear off about James the First and the divine right of kings, right? That's sort of like what I would like to have that conversation with you guys, okay? So just sort of approach this assignment, with confidence, and, with confidence and confidence, all right? Also, let me see what else. Okay. So last class, I was talking about James I, and the divine right of kings, and how James I is sort of like a divine right absolutist monarch. So I'm trying to describe like this political situation where the king has absolute power over his subjects. Now, to make that point, as I'm going to do throughout the rest of the semester, I'm going to sometimes make references to stuff that's going on in popular culture. So the last time when we were talking about James and how he theoretically has all of this power, I referenced a YouTube video. Does anyone remember what I referenced? I said, hide your kids, hide your wife, hide your husband. And some students took offense to that, right? The students are saying, Dr. Petrakis, that's really not a very nice video, and it's making fun of people and making light of a lot of serious things. And to that, I actually agree, I sort of agree with that. I just want to make clear that what I was actually trying to convey to you is that by our standards, James I's position is ludicrous, right? The James I idea that he has power over, total and absolute power over his people, and he derives this from God and all of that sort of thing. By our standards, that's a ludicrous position. That's the only point that I was trying to make in class. So if I angered anyone or offended anyone in class, I'm really sorry about that. And from now on, I promise to make sure that my cultural references are a little bit more politically. All right? Okay, fantastic. So, does anyone have any questions about that or anything else? Have I fully extricated the foot from my mouth? Are we okay? Okay, good. Fantastic. So I just want to, are we ready? And I can speak. Are we ready for class? Okay, now I'm just gonna pick up where we left off. So the Anglican Church, right? So we're talking about the Anglican Church. And in your notes, like you can think of the Anglican Church, the Church of England, as the same thing. Someone after class said to me, is the Church of England and the Anglican Church the same thing? Absolutely. And for whatever reason, I'll try to be consistent, but sometimes I use those terms interchangeably. They are the same thing. The Church of England and the Anglican Church are indeed the very same thing. So the clergy are divided into a strict hierarchy, right? Someone at the end of class said, Dr. Petrakis, this hierarchy of the church, this looks remarkably like the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, with the only difference being that the king is head of the church and not the pope. That would actually be very correct. So there is a carefully gradated hierarchy in the Church of England. The monarch terms of the church and all of that. But he also has power over their bodies in terms of the law, right? So we're describing here a sort of all-powerful mind. Thomas Hobbes, you don't need to know his name or anything, but he's a political philosopher in the 1650s, is going to refer to this as the Leviathan, right? The Leviathan is a monarch or an all-powerful sort of ruler that has power over people's souls in terms of the church, but also in terms of people's bodies in terms of the law, okay? So the King of England is actually like really spectacularly powerful, and I know that comes across in James I's True Law, Free Monarchy. So there's like 5 archbishops, right? There's the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury is sort of like right below the king. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the most powerful archbishop of the Anglican Church or the Church of England. There's also about 100 bishops that sit below the archbishops, right? So this is a carefully gradated hierarchy of archbishops and bishops. Now below the bishops, there is of course about 1,000 parish priests. And these parish priests are the ones, that minister to the people, right? The parish priests are the ones amongst the people. Okay, good. So what I want to do, I'm being brave today, so I'm going to stop. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to ask us an eye-clicker question, and I'm hoping this is going to work. So the question is, I'm asking you guys a question, we're going to use our eye-clickers. So which of the following best describes James I's relation to the Church of England? So we just covered, so this is really going to be very easy, I hope. Okay, so which of the following best describes James I's relation to the Church of England? A, he has no relation to it, right? Nothing to do with the Church of England. B, he's the head of the church. C, he has some authority in it, but most power resides in the bishops and parish priests. Or D, authority within the church is negotiated between the king and parliament. So from our foregoing discussion on King James and all of that sort of thing, which one do you think is most true about all of these? So I'll give you guys about a minute to consider it, and then there's murmuring.
Click once. Yeah. I feel like I did something wrong. Yeah, I guess so. How do you know if it's working? Yeah, I know. How do I know if it's going? I don't know. I just clicked it. Whatever. I just clicked it. I don't like the idea.
Are you guys talking amongst yourselves, or are you trying to figure out, or you're saying that your eye-clicker doesn't work? Yes?
How would you know if it works or not? I just click it and.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. So 95% of the class has given the answer, the right answer as B. Fantastic. All right,
Okay.
I was really sort of like, oh God, what if they all say that, give answer A or something like that. Okay, good. So this is good. All right, so you guys hear what I'm saying, and this is good. Oh, I feel so good. I actually feel like I'm accomplishing something here. This is great. Fantastic. A for everyone. Love you, love you, love you. Great. Okay. Now why is it this?
My laptop now. It's okay. It's going to be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So, all right. So now I just want to talk about some other institutions in English political and religious life. So we've talked about the monarchy. So we're thinking about the institutions that sort of govern behavior in 17th century England. We've talked about the king, and we've read the True Law for Monarchies. So we know something about kingly or monarchical So to sit in the House of Commons, you have to own at least 40 shillings in property, right? So there's property requirements to sit in the House of Commons. The point that I'm trying to make is that in the House of Commons, it doesn't represent the voice of the people. It represents the voices of the moneyed classes, right? The relatively moneyed classes, right? So in other words, the political assumption is in the 17th century, it's not that everyone has a right to vote. This is a hierarchical society where everybody exists on the great chain of being, right? The people that have a voice in government are the people that own land in the country, right? So in other words, to have a voice in government, you actually have to own something, right? You have to own land in order to have a voice in how that land is governed. The House of Lords. Only the most powerful aristocrats and archbishops could sit in the House of Lords. So only the most powerful aristocrats and archbishops can sit in the House of Lords. So in other words, this is like the church, the most powerful church clergy and the aristocracy, right? So really powerful people sit in the House of Lords. And the House of Lords is divided, of course, between the Lords temporal and the Lords spiritual. All that means is the Lords spiritual are the clergy, and the Lords temporal is like the Duke of Monmouth or the Duke of Buckingham. So it's the religious and the non-religious members in the House of Lords. The number of Lords fluctuates throughout this period because they're appointed by the king. It's sort of like, it's kind of like the Senate in Canada, where the Prime Minister is not the king, but he can just sort of appoint people and all of this sort of thing. So it's kind of like the thing where if the king gets in trouble, he can just pass the House of Lords, more or less, with people that agree with him. And yeah, I know, it must be nice to be king, right? So it's just one of those things where this is why the House of Lords, historically speaking, has always supported the interests of the king, right? Because he's the one that's giving them their jobs. Can I move on? Are we good? Great. So I want to talk to you, now I'm going to get into like the narrative. So pretty much throughout the semester, there aren't going to be a lot of slides with words. So right now, I'm just going to try to like speak to you guys about James the First. So are you ready for it? So we're starting like, I'm not going to, this slide is going to be up for a while. So I want to talk about King James the First, like his personality, and how historians have thought about him. Are you ready? So James is 37 years old when he becomes King of England in 1603. Right, so he's 37 years old when he becomes King of England in 1603. Before he was King of England, he was the King of Scotland. He becomes the King of Scotland in 1566. The point that I'm trying to make is that when James becomes King of England in 1603, he's already sort of like a mature king. He understands how politics works, and he's essentially been battle tested. So he comes to the English throne in 1603, and he's sort of like a mature guy. He's been king in Scotland for about 30 years before, and he understands how politics works. He's not some like, 17 or 18-year-old kid that becomes king. He's a mature man who understands politics. Not only that, but like his mother is none other than Mary, Queen of Scots. His mother is Mary, Queen of Scots. I know that you've probably heard that name before, and this is important because she was run out of her realm. She was deposed by her people. So her people, James's mother, was run out of Scotland, and she was eventually executed. Right? So this is James, right? This is his mom. He's like, oh, who's your mom? He's like, oh yeah, she was run out of the realm, and she was executed. Okay? Mary, Queen of Scots is his mother, James's mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, is a Catholic. But when James receives his education, he's brought up as a Protestant, right? So he's brought up in the same religion as the English people, more or less. Not only that, but like, I don't know if you guys know this, but during the 16th century or the 1500s, this is like the period of the Renaissance, right? So James is being educated during a time of main tutor, right, the person that's educating James, is this really interesting guy named George Buchanan. I'll spell his last name for you. It's B-U-C-H, Buchanan, B-U-C-H, A-N-N-A-N. George Buchanan is an out-and-out radical, right? He's an out-and-out sort of Protestant radical. He is, as one historian pointed out, the most radical of, are you ready for it? So George Buchanan, his teacher, is the most radical of all, you ready for it? Protestant Reformation. So if you're writing out the words Protestant Reformation, you just might write PR for short. Protestant Reformation, political theorist. So he's educated by this radical, right? This total out-and-out Protestant radical, George Buchanan. George Buchanan teaches James some really crazy things, right? So it's like, I know you guys think that you're learning crazy things in school, but you have to keep in mind that these are the things that George Buchanan is teaching a king. And you're like, so Dr. Petrakis, what is George Buchanan teaching the king? Well, George Buchanan is teaching the king about social contract theory. He's teaching the king about social contract. Who's heard of the term social contract before? Who's heard of the term? Can someone just tell me what is the social contract? Rousseau wrote a really great book called The Social Contract. What's a social contract? Yeah, go for it. Okay. You actually can, but okay. Okay, great, fantastic. That there is a contract that exists between the king and his people, right? This is a social contract. That there exists a contract between the king and people, and this contract stipulates a couple of things, right? The social contract stipulates that the king has to be good to his people. The social contract stipulates that the king can't go against the law, right? So James is taught that there is a social contract between the king and people. And this social contract governs the relationship that the king has to his subjects, right? What happens if James breaks the social contract? So this is what James's tutor is teaching him as a young boy. He's telling him that there is a social contract, and what happens if the king breaks the social contract? In the back? Got you. Okay, great. So the king creates order and civility.
Yeah. So if he breaks that, the people are probably going to riot and stuff like that.
Not only that, so he's like, yeah, if the king breaks the social contract, then what Buchanan teaches James is that if the king breaks the social contract, you ready for this? He's teaching the king that if he breaks the social contract, the people have not just the right, but the duty to overthrow the government, kill the king, you ready for it? And then create a new government that is going to uphold the social contract. So this is what the king's tutor is teaching the king, right? So this is absolutely radical. So the point is that Buchanan is teaching James I, as he's a young kid, that it's justifiable to overthrow the government if the king breaks the social contract, right? So not only that, but George Buchanan argued that if the king breaks the social contract, any individual person is justified in killing the king. Not just an aristocrat, not just the highborn people, but anyone is thoroughly justified in killing the king if he breaks the social contract. So George Buchanan, you guys think that, your professors are radical and teaching you crazy stuff. This is truly crazy stuff that Buchanan is teaching James. So my point is that James is intimately familiar with what historians call, ready for it, resistance theory. This is resistance theory. Resistance theory is just simply theorists in the 16th century thinking about ways to resist unlawful power. for James's development as a king, an intellectual, and a scholar. When James comes to the throne, when James comes to the English throne in 1603, he has male heirs to the throne. He has two sons. One son is named Charles, who's going to be the King of England, who you've read about for today. Charles, Henry. Henry's going to die. Unfortunately, I brought tissues if anyone's going to get upset. So Charles Henry's going to die young, and he has a daughter, Elizabeth. When James comes to the throne, people are really happy to have a male king, right? So when James comes to the English throne in 1603, the vast majority of English people are really happy to have him. The reason for that is not necessarily because they necessarily privilege men over women or anything like that, but it's just that the person who ruled before James was Queen Elizabeth I, right? And you've seen movies and all of this sort of thing about Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth had ruled from, you ready for it, 1558. So the previous monarch before James ruled from 1558 to 1603. Her reign was the longest in European history up until that time. So when Elizabeth dies after almost 45 years on the throne, people are sort of happy to have a new monarch, right? And they're even more happy to have a male English monarch that a male king who has heirs to the throne. Because Elizabeth, of course, was the Virgin Queen, and she died heirless. So James comes to the throne, and he has male heirs, and everything is great. Awesome. So the thing is that James, when he comes to the English throne, gets really bad press, right? So James, when he comes to the English throne in 1603, some English people give him a hard time. So James gets bad press. And the person who's writing bad things about James is this guy, Anthony Weldon. He's a courtier at James's court, so he's living with the king and all of this sort of thing. He's living at the king's court. And he writes the court and character of King James. And it's in the court and character of King James that, sort of informs how historians have traditionally understood James's reign, right? So Anthony Weldon writes this history book, essentially about James, right? Anthony Weldon lived at court with James, and the picture that Anthony Weldon presents is really unflattering, right? So the picture of James I in his court is unflattering. I'm going to suggest that James is one of the best kings to have ruled in the 17th century, but that's really not saying that much. Okay, Anthony Weldon doesn't like James primarily because James is Scottish. And when James came to the throne, he brought a lot of Scotsmen with him. And the English, some people at James's court in England didn't like that very much, right? So let me read to you what Anthony Weldon has said about James. So he characterizes the Scottish people, Anthony Weldon does, he characterizes the Scottish people as sort of like ragamuffins. They live in huts, and they sleep with their animals. Okay, so this is a sort of picture. So James comes to the throne, and Anthony Weldon publishes a book about James at the English court, and it's very sort of unflattering to James. So Weldon, in this book, and I'm going to quote from him. Are you guys ready for this? You don't have to write this down. I just want you to hear me. So Weldon says, and he's talking about the Scottish people, he says, pride is a thing in their bones and their flesh, naturally abhors cleanness, right? So the Scottish people are always dirty. The people that James keeps at court are always dirty, right? He says, their breath commonly stinks of pottage, and their linen piss. Their hands of pig turds, and their bodies of sweat, and their splay feet never offend the socks. To be chained in marriage with someone from Scotland were to be tied to a dead carcass and cast into a stinking toilet, right? So this is how Anthony Weldon is describing King James I of England. Scotsmen, they're so backward and all of that sort of thing. Now, unsurprisingly, Anthony Weldon has a big falling out with James, right? James got a hold of the book and he's like, what? What are you talking about me? And all of that sort of thing, and kicks Weldon out of court. So, after that, Weldon continues to write against James I, right? So he gets kicked out of court, and he continues to write these accounts. So some of the literature that he produces is incendiary, and it forms the basis of what most modern historians wrote about James for the next 250 years. So the point that I'm trying to make is that Anthony Weldon's work on James I not only colored accounts of James among his contemporaries, among the people that lived at the time, but it also colored current historians' accounts of James I's reign. So Anthony Weldon's books and literature and all the stuff that he's writing have been profoundly influential in our contemporary understandings of James I's reign. Okay? So in other words, the point that I'm saying, it's like Weldon's version of history actually sticks, right? So English historians loved it. In Britain in the 20th century, English historians loved Weldon's account because it denigrates Scotsmen. And English people in the early 20th century, always thought of themselves as superior to Scotsmen. So it resonates with Weldon's account, really resonates with them. So this description of James I emphasizes his poor leadership, and it allows historians to talk about or to make arguments for, you ready for it? This is important, long-term causes of the English Revolution, right? So historians, basing their accounts on Weldon's hilariously inappropriate works on James I, have made really sort of convincing arguments that there were long-term causes of the English Revolution, right? So when historians are always asking the question, what caused the English Revolution? So really up until about 20 years ago, historians would always say, of course, James I laid the foundation for the English Revolution in the 1640s because he was such a terrible king. How do they know that? They know that because they were reading Anthony Weldon's books, right? So this account of Anthony Weldon has absolutely informed historians' discussions of James I since 1603 all the way up until about 1990. Okay, so this is important. It's allowed historians to sort of make claims for the long-term causes of the English Revolution. Anthony Weldon, for instance, emphasized that James's court, so his palace, courtly life at James's court, you ready for it, was immoral, right? So they're saying, Weldon is saying James's court is immoral. Not only is he a Scotsman, and that's pretty bad because Scotsmen, according to Weldon, sleep with animals, right? Have splayed feet that never offend the socks, right? And all of that sort of thing, right? So this is an immoral court. So Weldon has some memorable portraits of James. So I'm going to read to you some of what Anthony Weldon says because it's very descriptive and maybe offensive. Okay, listen. So Weldon has these memorable portraits of James. So James kept homosexual lovers throughout his whole life, right? So James kept homosexual lovers throughout his whole life, and that's going to come into play when we talk about the Duke of Buckingham. So Weldon portrays James as a dirty old man. That this court of James I is immoral. He has gay lovers. So dirty is a major theme that runs through Anthony Weldon's books, right? So his books, so the theme of dirtiness or uncleanliness run through all of his works. So dirty is a major theme. So it's said, Weldon writes about that after hunting, and James I always loved to hunt and all of that, so James goes hunting. He would be so intent on shooting the deer or something like that, that he would simply go to the bathroom in his own pants, right? So James is like, he's totally intent on, killing the deer or the hog or whatever, then he just goes to the bathroom in his own pants. And Anthony Weldon says, and I quote, that James is, and I quote, a stinking mess, right? So James is like, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom in my pants. So Weldon also claims that James is kind of creepy, right? So not only is he nasty, pooing in his pants and all of this sort of thing, he's also creepy. So listen to this. This is typical of the 17th century. So he says James the First. You don't have to write this down. Just hear me. So this is what Weldon is making the claim that James is creepy. He says James the First was a man of timorous disposition. So timorous. So he's sort of like shy, right? He's timid, right? A man of timorous disposition, with large eyes, ever rowling after any stranger who came into his presence, right? Remember that James is a homosexual. So at court, James is always looking around for like the young men and this sort of thing, right? He says, a tongue too large for his mouth made him speak full in the mouth, and every drink very uncomely, as if eating his drink, which comes out the side of his mouth. So it's like he's drinking, he's like, oh, and then like water's coming out, and he's looking around, and all of that sort of thing, right? And then he says, his legs were so weak that he had to prop himself up by leaning on other men's shoulders. So the picture he's presenting is where he's got his arm around someone's shoulder, drinking his cup, and like, looking around for young boys. And then he says, as he has his arm around other men's shoulders, he's fiddling his codpiece all the while. So he's like, oh. Okay, so this is the picture. Alright, so this is the picture that Anthony Weldon is portraying of the king, right? Looking around, eating his drink, and playing with himself after he goes to the bathroom in his own pants. Okay, so this is the picture that Weldon portrays James. But the thing is, it's sort of unfortunate because this is the picture that sticks. Up until about 1990, this is the source that historians would use to talk about James's reign, right? So while it's hilarious, right, and it's ridiculous, but this was the primary source that historians used. I'm going to bring up the issue of homosexuality at James's court. So it's in the 16th and the 17th century. This is going to cause a lot of problems for James. But I just want to make the point that it's not homosexuality that bothers James's contemporaries. During the 16th and 17th, like indeed through the ancient, medieval, and early modern period, sexuality was conceived as something fluid, right? So like this dichotomy that we have between straight and gay isn't one that existed, that's really an invention of the 19th century. What James's contemporaries are going to give him a hard time about isn't because he's gay. James had a wife and who he had children with, and he of course loved his wife very much, right? One of his gay lovers, the Duke of Buckingham, is also going to have a wife who he loves very much and have children with him. So this sort of dichotomy that we have between straight and gay, it didn't exist back in the medieval, ancient, and early modern period. This is a 19th century invention. The reason why James's contemporaries gave him such a hard time was because he was giving titles of nobility to his lovers that were low-born. That's the problem that his contemporaries have with this. It's not because he's gay or he has homosexual relationships. It's because he's conferring great titles and giving them all of this money on people, on his lovers that happen to be low-born. And that's what was beyond the pale. So it's not because he's a homosexual. So I want to talk a little bit about what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the religious settlement. So far with James I, we talked a little bit about his upbringing, his education. And we've talked about interpretations of his reign by his contemporaries. We talked about Anthony Weldon. So right now I want to talk a little bit about the religious settlement that comes in when James becomes king. So it's like we're just shifting gears a little bit here. So before I talk to you guys about this, I need to sort of make sure we understand the terms by which behavior is taking place. So we have to understand the English Puritans. If we're going to understand James's religious settlements and all of this, we have to understand Puritanism. And Puritanism in the 16th and particularly in the 17th century is a force to be reckoned with. This is a force to be reckoned with. So when we talk about Puritans and all of this, like Puritans are intolerant. Like if there's one, you can sort of think of like the Puritans as kind of like the Taliban. These are, and I'm serious, these are religious fundamentalists, right? That there is no abstract conception of God, that heaven and God are as real as we all are here today, right? And they take this stuff deadly seriously. So they're intolerant. So I know that we live in a day and age that respects diversity. You couldn't have anything further from the truth in the 17th century. We know from the great chain of being that unity is God, right? Like this is the great chain, and this is what James talks about in the true law. So we're going to talk about the Puritans, and when we talk about the Puritans and Catholics and all of that sort of thing, we have to keep in mind that these people have worldviews very, very different from our own. I happen to believe that this is what makes history interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk about it. So what the Puritans want to do is they want to purify the English church of what they considered popery. Not popery like the stuff in your bathroom, but Roman Catholicism. That's what I mean. So they want to purify the English church of popery. So like you're like, Dr. Petrakis, what the heck is popery? What do you guys think is popery? Somebody go. Okay, great. Popery, someone in the back? Did you have your hand up? Yeah?
Evil or, anything that's not Protestant.
Oh, fantastic. Evil or everything that isn't Protestant. I would say that's absolutely right. Yeah, in the back, yeah, blue shirt.
Things left over or vestiges from Catholicism.
Okay, great. The vestiges of Catholicism, right? Because England is a Protestant church, but as we said before, there were certain vestiges of the Catholic Church that still existed, right? Like, for instance, the hierarchy of the church, right? Bishops, archbishops, and all of that. That's very Roman Catholic, right? Popery in the 16th and the 17th century imagination, right? So popery in the 16th and 17th century imagination, particularly for English Puritans, right, Laura, is satanic darkness. That's what this is. It is satanic darkness. Popery represents something visible, something that you can touch. The English Puritans, popery was pretty pictures and gilded images. Pretty pictures and gilded images of the church that drew people away from the true religion. So pretty pictures, gilded images, monumental architecture. All this does, according to the Puritans, what this is a diabolical scheme by the Popish Antichrist to lure people away from the true religion. So popery is satanic darkness, it is pretty pictures, it is gilded images, it is incense at church, it is things, aspects of Roman Catholicism that you can actually touch. They are tangible. The reason and all of this is, right, all of this is a diabolical scheme by the Popish Antichrist 16th century is diabolical. Do you guys hear what I'm saying? Okay, good. Fantastic. All right. So mostly the Puritans don't like this whole sort of like, there's a bunch of stuff, and we're not going to get into it. I mean, like, they're very particular about what exactly they do not like believing. Most of all, so the big ones, are the hierarchical structure of the Anglican Church, of the Church of England. Mostly, the Puritans are sort of like, sorry, I'll let you write that down. I'll give you a second. The Puritans are anti-clerical. You're like, Marcus, what is anti-clerical? It just means that they don't like the clergy. They don't like the clergy. Particularly the archbishops and the bishops. Particularly the hierarchical nature of the English church. The Puritans believe that every man or woman, mostly men though, through their own natural reasoning, reading the Bible, can understand it for themselves. You do not need a priest as an intermediary between the people and God, right? So what the Puritans want to do is they want to remove the church as an intermediary between the people and God. That's what they want to do, right? A direct relationship, which is kind of horrifying. It's always horrifying to me. I don't know if it's because I have a guilty conscience or whatever, but anyway, moving on. They want to get rid of priestly vestments. So because they're anti-clerical, they want to make the priests, or they want to at least make the priests look not so darn priestly, right? So get rid of all of those vestments and all of that accoutrement, or the accoutrements of priesthood, right? Because, you know, like the priests in the Catholic Church, like they very much look like priests. There's no mistaking a preacher from like the laity. The priest has, in the 17th century, he had his vestments. He had like a cape. Some of them held a scepter. So it's sort of like the Puritans want to get rid of it, right? The Puritans are sort of like, we don't need this priestliness, right? Every man is his own priest, is what they believe. Okay, great. They also want to get, all right, so like their big ones are, they want to get rid of a railed off altar table. Why would they want to get rid of a railed off altar table? Why, what? Yep.
But then the rail like makes it so that it's like a separation from God.
Very good. So the railed off altar table, so like at Mass, there was a railed off altar table. And the Puritans want to get rid of that. Because a railed off altar table suggests that miracles are happening at the Mass. That the priest has the power to turn the bread and the wine, literally, through miracles, into the body and blood of Christ. And that's what a railed off altar suggests. That it's that miracles are happening. Protestants, of course, believe that the Mass is done symbolically. Catholics believe that this is a miracle that happens, and they do it at a railed off altar table. The Puritans want to get rid of it. So we've actually entered into this world of arcana of 17th century religious belief. You don't need to I know that you guys are like, oh, you know, I'm going to memorize all these. I think the important part is just to understand the general worldview of the Puritans, that anything that smacks of popery is satanic and all of that sort of thing. The priestly vestments and the railed off altar table are just some examples of what they believe. Okay. So, like I said, the Puritans, what they want to do is purify the English church from the relics of popery, right? And popery, superstition, all of this sort of thing. What the Puritans want to do is they want to get back to the early days of the early Christian church, right? So it's like if you were to be like, okay, we're going to sit him down, you know, okay, Mr. Puritan, what do you want? What is it that you desire? And the Puritan would tell us, he'd say, okay, Dr. Monarchies, what I want is to live as the early apostles did during when Christ was around. Like the Christianity of back during the Bible period, right? This is what the Puritans want to do. They want to get rid of the church hierarchy, and they want to get rid of the clergy almost completely, right? Because this smacks of I'm the new English king. I'm going to try to like talk to them, right? Negotiate, and through negotiation, try to compromise with them, right? This is what he wants to do. So he's like, okay. So James is an academic, right? So this is going to be a problem for James. James isn't actually intelligent. James is smart. James is educated. So James is this kind of makes him a doofus. What he wants to do is he's like, well, what we're going to do is have a conference, right? This is what academics do. He's like, we're going to have a conference. We're going to convoke together. We're going to get together at Hampton Court, and we're going to have a conference. We're going to talk about it. James is like, well, I'm the king of England. I'm the king of the church. We're going to talk about it. So he's like, we're going to meet up at Hampton Court. Has anyone been to Hampton Court, by the way? Hampton Court? Okay, good times. Anyway, moving on. So what he does, what he tries to do, is he tries to deal with Puritanism and define the Anglican Church. So he's trying to get all of the great minds together, and he's like, we're going to have a talk about it. He's like, we're going to talk. We're going to have like, vegetables and those, little plastic things, and then we're going to have dip, and it's going to be great. And then there's going to be bad coffee, as conferences are. Everyone's going to be like over caffeinated, and they get together, right? And James is like, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to work through this, and it's going to be awesome, right? So James gets everyone together at Hampton Court. So what James actually manages to do is he manages to get together some of the best minds in England, and they agree to translate. You ready for it? They agree to translate the official English Bible. And this is, of course, my friends, the King James Bible. This is the only thing that they managed to do, right? So he's getting everyone together at Hampton Court, and they're like, okay, we're going to translate the Bible, get a new English Bible, beautiful Bible, and this is all that they're going to do. James truly believes, so like we talked about the worldview of the Puritans, all right, we also have to keep in mind the worldview of the king. We have read James's True Law of Free Monarchies. We know something about how James feels about the office of kingship, right? So it's sort of like we have the Puritans who have what they have a certain worldview, and James who also has a very definite worldview. He fervently believes in this idea of divine right, and he believes that any change. So this is important. So you ready for it? Okay. So James truly believes that any change to the structure of the Anglican Church, so any change to the hierarchical structure of the Anglican Church, so the Puritans want to do away with it. The Puritans want to totally dismantle the English Church. They want to get rid of the archbishops. They want to get rid of the bishops, right? They want to get rid of all of those accoutrements that separates the clergy from the people. What might James think about this? What might be James's? So we ask James. We sit him down, as he's like, we sit him down. We're like, James. So like, what, how do you feel about the Puritan position on your church? What might James say? What might James say about it? Yeah. Okay, great. That's that. See, look at that, the right answer. So James immediately recognizes that any changes to the structure of the church is going to have a direct impact on his own power. Because James is at the head of the church. If you dismantle the church hierarchy, he has no power, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is that James immediately realizes that any Puritan changes to the English church is going to undermine his power. There's a great phrase that James used to sum all of what I'm saying up. And he says, no bishop, no king. Right? That's James's phrase. No bishop, no king. In other words, James knows if you get rid of the bishops, you get rid of the king as well. This is something that's going to happen in the 1640s. The English Civil War is going to be about exactly what the Puritans want. And they are going to get rid of the bishops, and they are going to get rid of their king. So it's interesting to think about it. James sees it in 1604, that any sort of changes to the Anglican Church means changes to the monarchy. So it's 12, all right, so. Okay, so what time is it? 12:09. It's 12:09, so why don't we take we're going to take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 12:15. Don't go home. The rest of the class is going to be great. So we're going to take about 5 minutes. So, quiet. I'll see you.
It's a fun class.
It is. I really like it. It's my cooker. I think it's set down.
Are you gonna? You can buy like a used one if you want. They have a whole bunch of them.
No, like the used ones are the old soft ones.
And you can't use the old one.
Well, you could, but it might not work as well. And you know what?
That's true.
I got to pay like $30 for it.
And that one is 40, so you're not losing that much.
Oh, this is nice. Can I see this?
Yeah, go ahead.
What is this?
It's like a Ukrainian symbol.
This looks like something I recognize.
It's like all Ukrainian stuff. Let me just know it. Oh, sure. It was really like twisted, so I need to like straighten it out.
You wear that every day?
Well, yeah, it just kind of like stays on with me. It doesn't like. Yes.
I need to get a necklace that's like silver or gold that I can wear every day so that it goes like green up my neck. And
This
I can
one's
just like
silver.
keep it on.
Get something like portrait. Why not?
I'm going to Portugal next year, so I need to get earrings while I'm there. Because I need gold earrings because I can't wear bigs. I can barely wear silver. I might get a necklace.
Why not?
Gold is supposed to be less expensive there because it's the Portuguese gold and not. It's like a yellowy gold.
It's good. It's a good kind of thing.
Sorry guys, excuse me,
Right now, I'm just taking a look at it because I need to get into programs. I think both of you are second year.
you're transferring, you're technically a first year. I'm pretty old, I'm older than you, aren't I? 20? Am I? I'm only 20 in August.
You guys start your essay yet? No, I was working on a different essay. I finished my other essay.
And you have to read the bottom too.
Oh, that's clever. That's so clever.
I love that jokes. It makes me seem so nerdy, but it's so funny.
But they are funny. Aww.
Do all the reading and stuff. Paper I have in any decent amount of time. There's two other ones. So that all the
I have a test in sociology next week, and I have a quiz today, and I have a
So, you guys know, I'm gonna say this probably a lot throughout the semester, but you know I love you guys, right? And I feel terrible sometimes about how, sometimes your guys' icebreakers aren't gonna work, and I understand that, sometimes you're gonna be late for class, and sometimes you're gonna be late for class, and that's gonna mean that you can't click in, and now your attendance points don't count, and all of that sort of thing. If this were a class, in an ideal world, if this were a class of 35 or 45 or 50 students, I would be okay with it, because I would get to know every single person in the class, and I would be able to make exceptions and all of that sort of thing. In such a large class as this one, I very much want to be like, oh sure, your clicker doesn't work, just sign in and all of that sort of thing. If I were to do that in a class this big, the rest of the semester would be an absolute catastrophe. So I sort of, just in the name of absolute fairness, I have to just sort of say, well, if your clicker doesn't work, I'm sorry, but you can't get attendance for today's class, even though you were here, right? If you come in late and you don't click in or whatever, when we're doing attendance, I'm sorry. And I hate it, and I hate it, and I hate it. But it's just the way that it sort of has to be. The only concession that I can offer you guys is that attendance, class attendance, is worth so little amount of your grade that all of this is going to come out in the wash, right? So it's like if you don't click in one day, or your clicker doesn't work, or whatever, if that happens a couple of times, it's not going to be the difference between getting an A and B. It's going to come out in the wash. It's going to be all right. But if it's a sort of thing where you're missing all of the classes and that sort of thing, that's just not going to happen. You guys are going to go to every class and all that sort of thing. Also, and the other thing too is I'm not going to take attendance at the same time throughout the semester. I'm going to try to change it up. And the only reason why I do that is because or maybe I'll take it twice in one class, right? And the only reason why that is because I just really want you guys to, it's not because I love hearing, I love it that I have this power over you and I can make you take notes and all this sort of thing. It's just simply just to make your class run smoothly through. Okay, so I'm very conscious about me tyrannizing over your guys' lives and the injustice that happens with these universities, with your attendance and all of that sort of thing. But just so long as we come to class, register our clicker, whatever the heck that thing is, we're going to get through this just fine. Okay? Yeah, go for it. You mean, so the question is getting the right answer actually matter? Actually, it doesn't. So no, it doesn't. Just so long as you're here and you click and you sort of click in for attendance, I'll be able to, it matters in the sense that if you answered the first question that James doesn't have a relationship to the church, after our discussion you might sort of want to check yourself. But in terms of whether or not I'm only going to give you half points for getting the wrong answer, that's not going to happen. Just so long as you're here and you click in and all of that, you're going to get full points. If you're getting questions wrong, that's going to lower your grade when you take the exam because you don't know the material, right? And if you're getting questions wrong on the iClicker, just make sure you come and see me. Okay, great. So we're going to move on and we're going to talk a little bit about what James does, right? So James is very suspicious, right? James is very suspicious of this Puritan agenda for reform, right? So what the Puritans want, James is sort of very suspicious of this, right? Because he thinks that the Richard Bancroft to the Archbishopric of Canterbury. So he appoints Richard Bancroft to the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is a very important position within the Church of England. So Bancroft is essentially the second in command of the Church of England. And so you're like, okay, Dr. Trackus, who is this Bancroft? He is fervently against Puritanism, right? So James appoints this guy to office that's vehemently against Puritanism. So basically, any of these Puritans that don't believe in James's position, right, of the church hierarchy, investments, and all of that. So if you don't believe in what James wants, under Bancroft, you're kicked out of the church. So under him, during his tenure as the Archbishop of Canterbury, he ejects 90 people from the Church of England, from the Anglican Church, under Bancroft. So there's about 90 Puritans that he winds up kicking out of the church. He says, you guys need to get out of here because you don't believe in what the king wants. So it's under Bancroft, in the beginning of James's reign, that you see the very first group of Puritans sailing over the Atlantic Ocean and coming to America, right? The very first sort of glimmering of a Puritan migration to America happens under Bancroft, right? So there's like 90 people, and there are some people that are so ideologically rigid that they can't live under James. They come to the United States, right? And you're like, oh, in the United States even today, there's this weird sort of like intermixing of the church and state. This is because of the Puritans, right? This is because of the Puritans. So this isn't really that big of a deal, right? Because the exodus from England to America is very small. What James tries to do is appease what he tries to do is appease the moderates in his church, right? So the Puritans are the extremists, and what he tries to do is make the people that are moderate very happy, right? So those people that don't hold such extreme views, he sort of gives them cushy jobs. He gives them jobs within the church hierarchy, right? So he tries to like support his power by patronizing people in the church that share the same views as he does. Great. So that's the religious position, right? So this is some of the intellectual and religious history of the early 17th century. So we know from the True Law of Free Monarchies that James is a vehement monarchist, right? So the point that I want to make is the title of James's tract, the title of James's treatise, the title of his work, right, treatise, whatever, tract, work, whatever it is you want to call it, it's not a novel, the True Law of Free Monarchies. So it's the True Law of Free Monarchies, you ready for it, or, right, so that's to keep in mind. Keep in mind that there is a rather big or in the middle of the title of his treatise, right? So what he's saying is that the monarch is all-powerful. He's divine. But if you read it carefully, it's like, or maybe not. So that's sort of how I want us to interpret it. So if you're taking notes, this should be important when you write your paper. Because I am asking you about just this, right? So James doesn't believe that he can actually rule. So here's the answer to the question. You guys are like, what does the professor want? Here I'm telling you that James is not saying that he's a tyrant that can do whatever he wants, right? So the answer to the question is not that he's a tyrant. It's something else. And I'm going to explain what that something else is. Right? Hold this one right for a second. Okay, good. So James is given, you ready for it? James is given to really extreme statements of divine right. In one sense, the True Law of Free Monarchies, James is saying that he is the most powerful person in the realm to like the third degree. Like he is just powerful, almighty, God's representative arm. So I'm going to give you a couple quotes, and in these quotes that I'm going to give you for this slide are just meant to underscore or highlight his extreme statements of divine right monarchy. So James is given to extreme statements of divine right. He says, for instance, A wise king coming in among barbarians first established the estates and form of government, and therefore made laws by himself. The kings were the author and makers of the law. So, in other words, what James is saying here is that because kings came about before the law, and this is, I think, on page 2 or 3 of this tract from our reading, he's talking about Fergus and all of this sort of thing. The point that he's trying to make is that because the king comes about before the law, what does that mean? What does it mean? If he comes about before the law, what does it mean? In the back?
Basically trying to say that he's above the law.
Absolutely. Because kings come about before the law, in the state of nature, back when everything was wild. Right? He's saying kings were around before the law. And because kings were around before the law, they are more powerful than the law. That's the point that he's making. Yeah?
Well, didn't King John sign the Magna Carta, meaning the kings aren't above the law?
James isn't talking about English. James is not, that's a good point. So he's saying, well, the Magna Carta, we just had like our 500-year anniversary or something like that. Probably more than that. I don't know if I can count. He said, it's like 1,000 years, wasn't it? 12? Anyway, moving on. 1215. The Magna Carta. And what the Magna Carta is that it's seen as historically like this check on the king's power. James is not bringing up the Magna Carta. The argument that James is making is that by natural law, common law, and divine law, he is the divine right king, right? So he's saying, and that's a good point. I mean, like you can maybe like if you want to make a point in your paper, that would be a fine point to make. It's not like he's bringing up the Magna Carta. Right? I love creativity. Fantastic. The king is overlord of the whole land, right? So this is where I got in trouble last class. I'll hold my tongue. He's the overlord of the whole land. So, and listen, he is the master of every person that inhabits the same. He owns you. Literally, he owns you. Not only does he own you, but he owns everything in the realm. This is ludicrous from our democrat. This should offend our democratic sensibility, right? What James is saying, this is an extreme statement of divine right mind. I own you, and I own everything in the realm, is what he's saying. He deploys something called the patriarchal metaphor. So, you're like, Chagas, what the heck are you talking about? I'll tell you, the patriarchal metaphor is that he describes his power in the same way, as the way that families are organized. That the king has power over his subjects in the same way that fathers have power over their children, right? And of course, I don't know how it goes in your house, but in my house, when I was growing up, the father was sort of a whole house, right? It was just sort of like, oh, I'm dead, oh, listen to me, sort of thing, right? Okay, so this is what James is talking about. That the king towards his people is rightly compared to a father of his children, and this is, so that's this here, the king and his father and children, this is the patriarchal metaphor. He also deploys this other argument, which is called the organic metaphor. And the organic metaphor is the head of a body composed of many members. So the king is conceived of the head of the body politic, right? So he's deploying actually two metaphors. One is the patriarchal metaphor, that he's the father of the subjects as the father is to his children, and then the organic metaphor that the king is the head of the body politic. So there's two things going on. So, and then the question is like, you remember Buchanan, James's tutor, teaches James that anyone can kill their king if he breaks a social contract? Like anyone. The lowest born person in the realm, if the king breaks a social contract, the lowest born person in the realm is justifiable in killing the king. James is sort of, and this is interesting because like James is so shocked and so traumatized by what Buchanan teaches him that for the rest of his life he wears a woolen doublet in case someone wants to come into his bedroom at night and stab him to death. Right? So Buchanan scared the crap out of James to the effect that he's like wearing a bulletproof vest for his entire life. He's like, oh God, anyone can kill me. So this in some sense is like one of the reasons why a psychological reason why James might be so given to these extreme statements of divine right rule, because Buchanan scared the bejesus out of him so much that he feels that like, he has to counteract that, right? There's also stories of like, if James would get like his reading wrong, Buchanan would like beat the crap like, so what if, the king is bad? What if the king does break the social contract? His tutor taught him that anyone can kill you. It's like, you're done. That's it. Goodbye. But James is saying, he's like, no. Actually, if a king does break the social contract, if there's a wicked king, the king is actually the Antichrist, what can you do? James says, a wicked king is sent by God for a curse to his people. The people have no recourse to a wicked king other than praying, right? It's sort of like if you have a wicked king, it's because you suck, right? Not because the king sucks. That's what he's saying, right? So that's what he's saying. So this is the wicked king is sent by God for a curse to his own people. It's like, oh, why is there such an evil king? And James is saying it's you. So that's okay. Can I move on from this? Are we good? All right, anyone? Okay. All right, so it's the true law of free monarchies, right? And so it's the true law. Or, right, so he's given, the point of all of this is that he's given two extreme statements of divine right rule, or the reciprocal and mutual duty between a king and his natural subjects. So in some sense he's saying, I'm the man, I can do anything I want. But in another sense, he's saying this is a reciprocal, oh gosh, geez. This is a reciprocal, again, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little blonde up here. This is a reciprocal arrangement between the king and his people, right? So this isn't a situation, so James is in some sense saying, I'm the king, I can do whatever I want, but let me explain later. That's what he's saying. So he's saying a reciprocal and mutual duty between a free king and his natural subjects. When James says free means absolute. So he's talking about the true law of absolute monarchies. He's true, I know we know freedom and all of this, but when James means free, he means like really, he can do whatever. Like truly free, that he can do whatever he wants. So he qualifies, so the point of the Trinity, is that he qualifies his argument. He qualifies his argument. He says, kings give their oath first to maintain the state religion. So maintain the state religion, not to change the religion, not to do anything like that, but to maintain the state religion. You ready for it? According to the law. According to established law. So James is saying I can do whatever I want, but there's a mutual duty here. I can't break the law. Right? So he's saying I can't break the law. He says next, and the whole treatise is about this, right? So I know I'm just giving you some examples here, but I'm saying, like, if you read the treatise, this is what he's talking about. He's given to extreme statements of divine right rule, but at the same time, if you read the document carefully, like you should all be doing, he actually qualifies his argument quite a bit, and that's what I'm trying to get across. That's the only thing I'm trying to get. So next, to maintain all the good laws made by their predecessors. So maintain the good laws, and when he says the good laws, he means laws that are put in place for the public good. Good laws made by their predecessors, and make sure that these good laws are put into effect. He says, by the law of nature, the king becomes the natural father to his people. This is the patriarchal metaphor. The father, though, right? So if you're thinking about your paper and divine right and how he qualifies his answer or his discussion, in one sense he's saying I'm divine right. I can do whatever I want. But so you ready for it? So if you look at the metaphors that he actually uses to make that point, if you sort of think about the images that he deploys to make his point, he's actually qualifying his argument quite a bit. Because of course the father can't do whatever the hell he wants to his children. This is a relationship, right, that is characterized, hopefully, by love, right? So he's saying, I'm the father to my children, I can do whatever I want. But actually with that comes certain responsibilities, right? And he explains what those responsibilities are, right? He says, I just can't, beat the crap out of my kids. I have to be nourishing. I have to educate my kids. I have to make my kids virtuous, right? And in the same way, that's how James thinks about his relationship to his people. So the thing is that like James is given to extreme statements of divine right rule. But if you read the document carefully, something else emerges. And I'm saying that what emerges is a discussion of the reciprocal duties between the king and the subjects. So that's sort of like what your paper's about. I mean, you guys are absolutely free to make whatever argument that you want, and in some sense, like you're going to be like evaluated on your use of evidence to support your thesis, right? I just think that if you look at this document carefully, I think something other than divine right monarchy emerges. I think what emerges is a discourse of monarchy and kingship, where the king is actually has a lot of responsibilities to his subjects, right? So I think that, generally speaking, is what's going on. Okay, good. Oh, now we get to talk about the problem of favorites. Good, good, good. Okay, good. So that's sort of what's going on in James's true law of free monarchy, right? So we've talked a little bit about James's political ideas. We've talked about religion. Now I want to talk about something a little different. So if you're taking notes, maybe like a new line in your notebook, a little star, we're going to talk about something a little different. And what we're going to talk about here is what historians like to refer to, are you ready for it? As James's problem with favorites. This is James' problems with favorites. So James has a lot of problems coming from his favoritism at court. So first of all, when James comes from the royal palace in Scotland, he's like, "Oh great, I'm going to be king now. This is awesome. I'm going to London. Who doesn't love London?" And when he goes to London from his court in Scotland, he brings with him all of his Scottish retainers. All of his friends from Scotland come with him to England, right? So when James comes to the kingly palace, when he comes to Whitehall in London, he brings with him a lot of people that are not English. Okay, he brings with him Scotsmen. England, unlike Scotland, is very rich. So James is coming to the throne in 1603. And England is about 10 times richer than Scotland. About 10 times richer than Scotland, and about 20 times more powerful. James is happy to be king. Right? James is happy to be king. I know that you guys are probably thinking, like, if James is Scottish, why is he coming to the English throne? Does anyone know why? Yeah. Okay, great. So Elizabeth, you know, remember we talked about Elizabeth at the beginning of class. Elizabeth was the Queen of England before James. She ruled for like 50 years or whatever, 45 years. She died. Elizabeth is also known as the Virgin Queen, right? So what that means is that she doesn't have heirs to the throne when she dies, right? So Elizabeth dies, she doesn't marry, and she remains childless. So she essentially, when she dies, they draw up a contract. James is a distant relative. He has this distant claim to the throne. They draw up a contract. It's called but anyway, they draw up a contract, and it makes King James the king of England. So that's why he comes to the throne, right? It has to do with Elizabeth dying childless, and James having a distant claim to the English throne. So when she dies without heirs, James comes to the throne. So when he comes to the English throne, he brings all of his Scottish. He brings his Scottish homies with him, right? Literally, he brings his homies with him, and he inherits a throne that's like 10 times richer and 20 times more powerful than the place he was from. So James is like, this is awesome. This is fantastic. He squeezes from his new position as king basically all the money that he can get, right? So James is going to use his office to sort of raise. He's going to do some fundraising, right? As king, and the way that he does this fundraising is going to upset a lot of the nobles, English nobles at court, right? So James is going to do some things at court to raise more money, right? Because he comes from a poor place, to raise more money that's going to really upset the English nobles that are there. So one historian talks a lot about this. He spent his whole career studying the king's finances. And according to this one historian, are you ready for it? James's reputation with finances is, and I quote, unredeemable. James was a spendthrift par excellence. It's like giving you guys like an unlimited credit card. It's like, right? But it's going to be a disaster, right? And this is what happens with James. So he spends all of this money, right? He spends all of this money. And by doing this, so he's trying to raise money and he spends all of this money, and he's going to do this in ways that alienates his English nobles, right? The king, in contempt I'm supposed to be a giver, right? I'm the king. I'm supposed to show my largesse and all of that sort of thing. But he's going to really upset some of his nobles as he does this. So let me explain. So first of all let me explain all of this through George Villers, the first Duke of Buckingham. So I'm going to explain what I just told you through the Duke of Buckingham. So I'm not going to refer to him as George Villers, I'm just going to refer to him as Buckingham. So Buckingham is one of the king's favorites, and he's going to lavish money and titles on the Duke of Buckingham. Through the Duke of Buckingham, we're going to see how James wastes a lot of money. So he meets the Duke of Buckingham in 1614. So James meets the Duke of Buckingham in 1614. James is 48, and the Duke is 22. So apparently for James, true love comes a little bit late, because James's true love, by all accounts, is the Duke of Buckingham. He loves the Duke of Buckingham. I'll describe this more luridly in a second. So what happens to the Duke, right? The Duke's fortunes absolutely skyrocket. His first job is the royal cupbearer. So this is a very intimate position in the English court, and he's supposed to hold James's cup. Studying court culture in the Renaissance and in the early modern period is really kind of interesting, because everyone in court has a function, and that function is to serve the king in some capacity. In Henry VIII's reign, the courtly culture was so carefully gradated that there was even a courtier whose job it was to wipe the king's butt, right? So it's sort of like everyone exists at court to serve the king. Incidentally, the groom of the stool, as he was called, was also the Lord Treasurer, right? So it's just sort of interesting. They did things differently back in the 1600s. Anyway, so the guy that wipes the king's butt and the treasurer are the same. Anyway, they had high expectations for these positions. Anyway, so he's the royal cupbearer in 1617, right? The royal cupbearer in 1617. He becomes an earl in 1619. So an earl's a big deal, right? An earl is a very high title of nobility. He becomes a marquis, an even higher member of the aristocracy, in 1623. He becomes the Duke of Buckingham, and the Duke is a title of one of the highest peers in the realm. So becoming a Duke, the Duke of Buckingham, the dukedom, is sort of like becoming. It would be like in the United States, it would be like being a senator, an extraordinarily powerful person, right? So he's becoming very powerful in a very short amount of time. So he essentially becomes rich, right, as a result of this. Duke of Buckingham, James lavishes money on the Duke of Buckingham, right? Okay. You know what? I can't give you all of the lurid details about the Duke of Buckingham, because we actually do need to talk more about the middle 17th century. Let me just give you some idea about how much money he's giving the Duke of Buckingham. So the king, on average, gives the Duke of Buckingham £80,000 per year. £80,000 per year. This is a lot of money in today's money, right? £80,000 is a ludicrous amount of money even by today's standards, right? To give you a sense of how much money that is, the national deficit in England under James I is £90,000 a year. So he's almost giving the Duke of Buckingham as much revenue as is created during the entire year, right? So James's sort of financial responsibility is irredeemable, right? What he's doing is he's lavishing the Duke of Buckingham not only with titles of nobility, but he's giving him more money than is almost conceivable by 17th century standards. He's giving him all of this money. So James essentially has a crisis of finances, right? He's giving so much money to the Duke of Buckingham that he actually begins to bankrupt his state, right? So this is a problem with a personal monarchy. There's a reason why we have constitutionalism in the world today, right? And this is it, because when one person can do what James does, this was not traditional for Parliament to give the king money, right? This was sort of like the king is supposed to raise his own money. And there were certain ways that the king could go about doing this. The problem is that under James, he's spending so much money. And he's spending a lot of money on Buckingham, but he's also a king at a time when it actually just costs more money to run the government, right? So he's living at a time when he's wasting a lot of money, and at a time when it costs a lot more money to run the government, right? So he inherits like a system of raising taxes that's really inefficient. What they did in the 17th century, or like Dr. Bachakis, they didn't fill out like a 1080 EZ, or that's what they have in America, but like one of those tax forms, right? No. What they did is the crown sold offices to people called tax farmers, right? So in other words, if you want to be a tax collector back in the 17th century, you had to pay a whole lot of money for that position. They're called tax farmers. What might be a problem with like buying this position for a lot of money? What might be some trouble with that? It might come up, I don't know. What might be trouble? Yeah, the blue shirt?
Some like random sketchy people might buy it as tax.
Okay, great. So you know that when money is the only criteria for like having this job, like not knowing how to count, right? Or having like an accounting degree. No, just so long as you can afford to buy the position, what else? They're the tax farmers. What else? Miranda?
Well, the fact that they have to buy the position assumes that there's money to be made, like it's an investment.
Absolutely. This is seen as an investment by tax collectors. So James is running a deficit because he loves the Duke of Buckingham. He's also living at a time when running the government, running the monarchy, costs a lot more. But he's inherited this English system of taxation that is terribly inefficient. So the money that the king is supposed to be raising through taxation, it's terribly inefficient. They're selling positions to be the tax man. So the person that gets the job is expecting to make a lot of money skimming off the top of the taxes that he collects, right? So this is a terribly inefficient tax system. That.
So did the king ever like consider giving less money to Buckingham or whatever that
He loves Buckingham. All right, so what I didn't read to you is like where he compares himself to Christ, and he compares the Duke of Buckingham to St. Paul. It's like the love that like this is love. And this is maybe a love that you can only find later in life. Like he loves the Duke of Buckingham, right? So James, like talking to James about like, James, maybe you shouldn't give Buckingham, 80,000 pounds a year. James is a divine right monarch, right? You don't really criticize the king, especially in terms of his undying and sacred love of the Duke of Buckingham, right? Yeah, go for it.
Knowing that Buckingham was a duke at this time and he had some knowledge, would he sort of feel bad in taking some of the money?
Oh my goodness. The Duke of Buckingham is going to become the Admiral of the Navy. He's going to be in charge of the English Navy. He's never been on a ship. Jesus is going into battle, and he's going to lose wars on behalf of England. So that's where this is headed. Yeah?
Were there any letters or any proof between the Duke and James?
Tons of proof. Yeah, no, I mean, you guys go to the library. You can search online, I'm sure, for the love letters between James I and the Duke of Buckingham. No, I mean, like, that's like, read the letters. That's love, man.
Did he at least love James back? Like true love?
I would say that absolutely he did. I would say absolutely the Duke of Buckingham loves him back. And not only that, when James dies, James's son, Charles I, who we read about for today, is going to befriend the Duke of Buckingham. So like they're tight, I guess, in modern times. They're very tight, right? And I don't think that, like, I guess I'm presenting this as a cynical observer and saying, maybe we're suggesting that maybe, James, or the Duke doesn't really love James, and that this is just like some conniving and overreaching commoner that becomes Duke. It's not really like that. Like all of the evidence points to that their relationship was legitimate, and his son, the future King Charles I, like became very good friends with the Duke of Buckingham. what I tried to say, what was I was trying to get across before, is that like this dichotomy that we have between being straight and gay doesn't, that is an invention of the 19th century, essentially. Like this dichotomy, either you're straight or you're gay. It's like, it's fluid, right? This is a fluid thing that, and it has been throughout all of history. I mean, like from ancient Greece through the Middle Ages up until now, it was only like when that takes us on a different sort of thing, but it's really, this is a 19th century invention. How we conceive of gender and sexuality is made by psychologists in the 19th century. It's not natural at all. Yeah, go for it. What? Now that's a next question. I would like to think no. I would like to think that this is that it was. I would like to think that that the Duke of Buckingham and James sort of didn't sort of parade their love for each other in front of their wives, but I'm sure that their wives knew. I mean, not just in a very sort of instinctual sense. Absolutely. Yeah. He was like a comic. That's a good question. Like, what, I would like to think that they were probably of the middling classes, say in the 17th century. Yeah? Oh, okay. All right, awesome. Hold on, is it time? Let me see. Is it time to go home? Yeah, is it time to go home? Oh, is it time to go home? It is time to go home. All right, then. So, all right, I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys next time. I have office hours after class. If anyone wants to come and chat, hang out, whatever. I'll see you guys next week.
Oh, I have like 3 hours to go. Why not?
You can.
I didn't even know spring was over.
Yeah, I don't. And we said like no one visits like him during office hours. He's like, oh, I get so lonely. That's what he said. He's like, I get really lonely.